Okay, here we are again. If this is your first time coming round, I would like to welcome you. If you are returning, what's up? How is everybody doing? I don't know about you, but it has been a very long week. I am spent. What does that mean to you? It means that there's likely not going to be a lengthy and emotional intro this week. I think we had enough of that last week, don't you? Seriously, I want to take a moment to again say thank you to all of you out there, my friends. And I really do feel that I have friends. It's amazing how when I do that, when I am able to sort of turn the filter off and just let myself out while I'm recording like this, and then I send it out into the internet and like thousands and thousands of people listen to it. It's such a wild thing that happens where, like, those of you who are listening and follow along, you do know me in a very intimate way because I'm doing this. Sometimes even more than like people who live like right around me who see me every day. It's a bizarre phenomena. And I often, when I'm like talking to people like in my daily life, I can sometimes tell, or not sometimes, almost always, I can tell whether they listen to the podcast or not. And sometimes I say things that I've said in the podcast intro to them because that's what's going on with me. You know, it's such a bizarre thing. But at the same time, some of you listening, when you send me these emails, it's like there's such a immediacy and intimacy to it. Let me give you an example. When I woke up on the Monday morning, that last week podcast's post, there was like a couple of emails. And often they're emails from people who live on the other side of the planet because they wake up to it before the people who live closer to my time zone do. And this was the first email that I read when I woke up the morning that it posted. I'm going to read it to you. The subject line is, "You made me cry tears of joy." It says, "Dear Jay, I've been hanging on each week for your podcast, more interested in listening to your story than your interviews, and tonight I am celebrating for you. I live in Australia, in a rural town, and my yoga community pretty much is me, your podcast, and the beautiful people you have conversations with. You make me feel normal, as much as anyone can be, and I thank you for being so open, generous, and compassionate. I greedily await each week for your podcast to come out, and tonight I treated myself to a bath and your podcast, only to leap out of the bath with a mighty woohoo when I heard your news about owning your first home. My 3 girls came running in to see what the commotion was, and I could only say, my friend has just had some good news. Really, really good news. And nice guys do win in the end, even if they can't always shoot hoops." They had no idea what I was talking about, but we all hugged and laughed. Thank you for sharing your life with me. Much love to you and your family as you move. Lucy. Oh, Lucy. Thank you so much for your note, my friend. I just loved it. The image was so clear of the girls coming up, and thank you. Thank you, Lucy, and everybody else who sent me some congratulations and good tidings. I continue to ride on some wave of elation, and even as we are getting contractors in and seeing all the work that needs to be done, it doesn't even matter. It continues to live the dream, my friends, and it's just been lovely to feel that I am among friends out there listening. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Always please feel free to reach out to me. Let me know what's going on with you. Also, last week's podcast with Andrew Tanner caused quite a bit of a stir on the Book of Faces, as my friend Ryan Cunningham likes to call it. Alexandria Crow, I don't know if you guys know her. She's somewhat high profile, I would say. And boy, did she have a bone to pick, and that's putting it generously, with the Yoga Alliance. And she's got a whole crew of people around her. And wow, it got real. Matthew Remski had to jump in there, and there were some very valid points made in criticism of the Yoga Alliance. There was also, in my opinion, a bunch of stuff that, I don't know, I'm in a pivotal kind of crossroads place with my own personal relationship to Yoga Alliance. I don't really know where I stand. I've decided to wait and see, because Andrew says that there's going to be some really big changes. There's going to be a new kind of transparency, apparently, and a whole bunch of new changes that are supposedly going to rock the yoga world. So we will see. We will see. I will talk to Alexandria. We'll get her perspective. And if you've got a perspective, again, one or two of you sent me a note about Yoga Alliance, but if you got anything you want to say about Yoga Alliance, shoot me an email. Okay, what about today? Today's podcast is with India Supera. And India Supera is I don't know what to even call her. Is she the founder? Is she the owner? Is she the mystical shaman at the heart of the Feathered Pipe Ranch in Montana? And you guys know I've been talking about it because I'm going there next month, June 17th through the 24th. And, you know, when I went into having this conversation with India, I had in mind that there's this reason why I got to go to the Feathered Pipe Ranch. I just felt it. I felt like in my soul, like I got to do this. I don't know why. Even if I don't make any money, I'm just going to go. And I don't know why, but I feel it, so I'm going to go. And I went into my conversation with India with that. But by the time we were done with this conversation, I knew exactly why I was going to the Feathered Pipe. And you get to hear that happen. You get to hear me come to that revelation. Also, going back to where I started today, this conversation that you're about to hear was recorded on the day that I closed the house. Literally like 3 hours after I signed my name and handed them a big check and they gave me the keys, we like raced home so that I could record this with India. So I was in a completely like otherworldly state, you know. I was not in my usual mode. I was a very kind of wild moment in time to then sit down and have this talk. And India's story is really inspiring. I'm often talking about how the podcast has become a way for me to explore the history of modern yoga. And often that's just like the New York yoga scene because that's where it starts for me. But I have been able to get some of the bigger name folks, you know, Judith and Eric and some of these other folks who've come on and give me some of the history before that. Well, we get some real deep history and wisdom today, my friends. We get to hear what the really early times and how so much of what we see now, you know, has other iterations that not many of us have gotten a chance to hear about. And so today you will get to hear about it. And if after listening to the podcast, you feel as inspired as I do, there is still a little bit of time. You've got like 3 weeks, 4 weeks. If you want to try to make it happen, come hang out with me at the Feathered Pipe Ranch in Montana, June 17th through the 24th. I am also going to be in Helsinki, Finland, August 23rd through 30th. You can find out about those events. You can listen to the archives of this podcast. You can find my online video offerings and my blog at jbrownyoga.com. If you're enjoying the podcast, you could show some support by going to iTunes, writing a review, giving us some stars. You could go to a blog or podcast page and make a direct donation. That kind of support is invaluable and really helps me make this all possible. So thank you to everybody who does that. Again, all of that stuff can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, on the other side, I'm going to hint you in and tell you some about the upcoming podcast. Last week I mentioned I got this question like, what's the new model? What's the new yoga career going to be if all these old models are falling apart? Well, the next couple of podcasts are going to be me talking to different people with different viewpoints on that very question. Good stuff coming. Okay, I think that is fine. Let's take this time to listen and enjoy the wonderful India Supera. All right, well, India, I'm very glad that we've managed to find this moment in time to sync up via the internet in this way.
Yeah, it's my second podcast, so I hope that it's so funny. I thought podcasts were something really special, but basically they're radio, so.
Well, that's funny. I think that's true. I think that podcast is just like old radio, but because radio kind of doesn't exist anymore, it's its own kind of thing in that context.
Yeah, you're right.
But in any case, I am very happy to speak with you. I have to be honest with you. I feel like a little less prepared than I would normally like to be because this is a very charged and exciting day for me. Like 3 hours ago, I bought a house for the first time in my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah. And the way that it came about, like, it's kind of great that I'm talking to you on this day in a way because the way that this house came about was such a occurrence of magic. Like, we found this house and we tried to get a mortgage for it and we couldn't qualify for the mortgage because we didn't show enough net on our tax returns. And then we kind of resigned ourselves to just renting. And while I was like searching rentals and it was like basically crushing and a bit depressing, frankly, I noticed that this house that we wanted was still for sale. And I just sent in like an email randomly on Zillow saying to whoever might get this, we loved this house and we couldn't get the mortgage, but if the owners had any desire to lease it or rent it, we'd love to have that opportunity. And I heard back from the selling agent, Glenn Tabor, and I am taking Glenn out to dinner because Glenn, he called me up and we had this whole long conversation. And then at the end of the conversation, he said, well, I don't really know if they'd want to do this, but I'll ask. And then the next day he called me back and he said, well, Mr. Brown, they don't want to rent it, but I think you might be able to buy it. And I said, excuse me? And apparently this couple, they owned the property outright. There was no mortgage on it. And Glenn basically, I think, convinced them to hold a mortgage for us.
Wow.
So we didn't have to go through a bank. And, there's some catches. It's like shorter term and higher interest, and we're going to have to try to refinance as soon as we can. But we got so suddenly just like we have the house. And now
amazing.
Instead of my life feeling like we're like going backwards, it feels like we're going to this exciting new great future. So
yeah, and you know what? That's really good for them too, because they're going to get more money than they could earn on their money.
Exactly. They're getting higher interest than they would have gotten anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case,
for you, it's a win-win because like rents are so high that anything you can pay towards your own place is amazing.
I know. And the reason I'm telling you all of this, India, is because, I have this gig at the Feathered Pipe Ranch next month. And, that too has felt like this kind of magical thing. Like, I don't really know why I'm doing it. Although today I got an email and a bunch of people registered. So there's a real group coming, which is great. But yeah. I just kind of felt like there's a reason why I have to go to the Feathered Pipe Ranch. I don't know why exactly, but I feel like I have to go there in the same way that I feel around this house happening. So in any case, I really have felt in the last few years like life wasn't feeling so magical, but today it feels very magical and you are part of it. So
oh, thank you. That's so sweet. But the magic, it's so strange how magic happens. And one of the things that happens when you get to a place like the Feathered Pipe Ranch, you're able to reconnect with your center. And even when people are making plans to come, that happens. So what happens is once you're centered, all the magic comes back into life.
Mm.
Once you get that, it's like a really good meditation. Afterwards, you walk out and you see beautiful birds, nesting or.
Well, I definitely think that's true. That's been all I've been trying to do is I keep saying, is keep my wits about me. Just keep myself in the right way for myself and just see what happens and do what you can, And anyways.
Where is the house at?
It's in Easton, Pennsylvania, which is this great town, and there's a school down the street and a park down the street, and it's a good situation. So in any case, I sort of had to get that out. I don't think I could have even started this conversation if I didn't say that out loud, because I haven't even, you're like the first person I'm telling, because I didn't want to tell people because I didn't want it to not happen,
That's amazing. And Pennsylvania is it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's really great. It's right there on the Delaware River, so we're very excited. And I am also very excited to talk to you. Let's talk about you and not just me today. How about that?
Okay, well, it sounds like a miracle's happening in every direction, so that's good to start with. So
absolutely. And I think that the Feathered Pipe Ranch, from what I know of it, which is not a lot, and I'm hoping to learn a little bit more today, is also quite a miracle.
I've always said that if you believe in miracles, then you can believe the story of the Feathered Pipe Ranch. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. You just have to have the belief that miracles happen in your life every day.
All right. Well, let's hear that story today. But before we hear the story of Feathered Pipe Ranch necessarily, I would like to learn a little bit about you prior to the Feathered Pipe Ranch, if that's okay.
Okay.
I was reading, I just looked at your bio, and it said, the first thing on the bio is it says, during the Nixon years, you felt that living in America was bad karma. And
I did.
And I have to say, when I first read it, I read it this morning, I thought, wow, well, if living in America was bad karma during Nixon, what is it now?
Well, I've matured a little on my thoughts, but it still is very challenging to live here now because we live in this most beautiful place. I mean, our continent is, the Americas are all beautiful, and the United States in itself is wondrous in how wonderful it is. And so to get something as negative as our current administration, it's very hard to every day think of the miracles that can happen in your life, because you feel like even if you're not intimately involved with politics, they affect you by every day something that I don't even care if you're reading the most conservative paper, there's negative things in it. The whole thing is negative. It's like the whole new problem with the world's politics, not just ours, is that they're going on fear-based. They aren't on hope. They're on fear. Mm. So it's a very scary time worldwide, because we aren't the only country in the world with bad administration. It's just not, I mean...
That's true, but at least in France, they voted for the same guy. I don't know if you saw that, but the election in France just happened, and they voted for the same guy. So that's a little bit encouraging, maybe, in terms of what's happening in the rest of the world.
And Holland didn't vote for their far-right candidate either. So there is positive, but I feel that out of all the nations in the world, Europe and the European Union is such an incredible thought. When you talk about countries that were traditionally enemies of each other, France and England would fight over the same piece of land forever, and it would go back and forth. Or I have a friend who was born in, her father and his three brothers were born in the same house, and one of them was born, this is of course right after World War I, but one of them was born in Russia, one of them was born in Germany, and one of them was born in Hungary, because that's how much tension was always going on. I mean, conquering armies would just come through. So it's not a new thing, but Europe took energy that was so negative and made it positive, and it did work for absolutely everybody. But when my daughter's married in Holland, in the Netherlands, so when I go there, I always feel like this is so enlightened. I mean, everybody gets to have insurance, everybody gets to go to college, everybody, and there's some limits to personal freedom, like no one in Holland would fight to own guns.
Right.
It's not a fight they would have. They are very happy living peacefully. And in a country like Germany and Holland that were like mongooses and cobras for most of the history of those two countries, now get their agitations out by bike races and soccer. And, they've really taken a different approach. And it seemed to be going along swimmingly until England decided to, see if they could destroy the European Union. But fortunately for us, it's stopping with England. I'm pretty sure of it. So.
Wow. Well, thank you. That's good analysis. And it is interesting to me how I'm speaking to you now, and then I was referencing back to this other time in your life. How old were you when you left America during Nixon?
Well, something, I didn't go straight to India. So first of all, I left in 1964, which Nixon wasn't president. But when I came back, when he became president, so let me see, I got to India in 1968.
Okay, wait a second, though. I jumped ahead too far then. So let's go even farther back. I'm sorry. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in L.A.
In L.A., really? I grew up in L.A. What a trip. But in a very different time. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, Canoga Park, Woodland Hills.
And I grew up in Downey, which was just 13 miles south of L.A., which now it's all merged together now. But in those days, that was like a suburban small town. So.
Wow. And so I was there in the 70s. When I don't know how old you are. I'm sorry. When were you there? When were you growing up in Los Angeles?
A little bit before you. I was there. I left LA in 1964.
Okay. All right. And so you grew up in LA, and what was that like? What were your folks like? What did they do?
Well, my parents were very interesting people. They actually are both New Yorkers, and they came out to California like so many people did after the war for better opportunities, better chances to buy a home. And we settled in LA, and my dad was a potter, and my mother was a writer, and she worked for newspapers. And then as we got older, right about when I was actually, 16 or so, my dad was still an artist, but my mom had started a business that of her own. She had an employment agency where was a headhunter kind of early in the game for that because of her newspaper contacts. She knew so many people. So.
Okay. And so when you left LA, how old were you?
Well, you know what? My family moved to Orange County, which seems to the John Birch Kingdom of the World, in 1964. And that's the same time I left because I probably left closer to 1965, but I didn't fit in anywhere in the area because we were very unusual people. My whole family was unusual, and I didn't fit in any way, with John Birchers or the surfing environment or LA always seemed to me shallow.
I felt much the same way throughout my childhood. I mean, I had a great childhood in LA, but I remember specifically hitting 16 and I would be driving in my car and I would take these drives on PCH and thinking to myself, I got to get out of here. This is not for me. I don't belong here. I just remember that.
And that was so clear in my mind. I had to find a place to belong because I was really such a misfit for all of my life because my interests were just not the same as everybody else's interests. They just weren't. Plus, I came from a weird family that didn't have real jobs and were kind of bohemian nature and, were very intellectual.
And was there yoga in your house as a child?
You know what? My father was actually a linguist. He was like, both of them my father spoke Hungarian and German and English and was a great admirer of Indian philosophy. So he understood some Sanskrit and some historical things about India. Like he loved the mythology, and I mean, we were the only people on the block that had a dog named Shiva. I mean, it was just like so.
So there was a sense of yoga in there, even though he wasn't necessarily practicing in the living room.
It wasn't hatha yoga, but he was definitely intellectual. He would have been a jnana yogi.
Uh-huh.
And my mother died when I was younger, right there in 64, 65. But my father ended up going to India and being with Sai Baba, and he loved the Hare Krishna people. He loved to dance on the street. So in those days they used to have, like, they'd march around anywhere, the airport or Venice Beach, and they'd be giving out the Bhagavad Gita, and they would be singing and dancing, and you couldn't hold my dad back. He'd just jump up and trance dance. It was in his soul somewhere, So I have to say he was very interested in Eastern philosophy.
And how much of you leaving LA had to do with your mom passing, do you think?
Probably just about everything. Actually, when my mom and dad were in a car accident, I was already on my way to India. But when I couldn't reach them, I called a neighbor, and she told me about the accident. So I headed right back to, and this was 65. It took me a while to get to India. I mean, it wasn't like I had to help my dad out, who was also hurt in that accident. But it was actually my first and most profound death. It wasn't my first death, but it was my most profound death, because when I got to my mother before she died, she was in a coma, and when I was holding her hand, I heard her voice say, "We aren't the bodies, and I'm not your mother. This body isn't your mother, because where's your mother now?" And it was kind of like internally. And when, I mean, this is kind of common knowledge to me now, we're not our bodies, but then it wasn't what I thought. So I went back and helped my dad out for about 6 or 8 months. And then I started again on my trip to India. But the reason I was able to stay those 5 long years in India was because if my mom was alive, I could have never done that, because she would have, drew me home some way or another. But my dad was all up for the adventure. He thought that was just a great idea and a great plan to go and spend time in India. So,
well, I'm sorry, I'm totally amazed by what your mom said. Like, what a profound statement. And had she spoken about life in that way before she was dying, or was that uncharacteristic of things that she might say?
My mother was the most psychic person I've ever met, and in an unobtrusive way. She didn't go around reading people's auras or anything, but she just always knew everything, knew things that were going to happen, knew it. And the year before she died, she told me that she was probably going to die in the next year, and that my father would remarry, and that this was just the course of things. So I didn't think very much about it, but when I got that internal message from her, I felt that she did die, because we're really of spirit, and only the body died. And it took me a long time to really think of my mother as passed over, because she was so present in my life. Somehow her wisdom and everything she had taught me had joined in, but she was truly psychic. But whether or not she ever thought about Indian philosophy or had read that stuff, I just couldn't say. She was psychic in a much more traditional way. She was, I can't even think of how I can describe it, but she always knew things. Like, my favorite story of my mother, before I went to India for a year in 64 and 65, I went to Mexico, and my dad went with me because I was so young. But I always used to say I was the only kid that ran away from home, and her parent came along. So my dad left. He only stayed for a certain amount of time. And then I was just wandering around Mexico with all the cool, expats that were down there, and all the Indians, and, everything that was available in Mexico in those years. And I didn't write home, we didn't have email and stuff. And I was sitting in Veracruz out on the steps in front of this hotel, and the guy from inside, just hanging out with kids and just playing around, and the guy from inside the hotel said, "Are you India Supera?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, your mom's on the phone." So I went in the hotel. I had no idea how my mom could find me, but she said she was meditating, and the marquee of the hotel came in front of her in a meditation, and she saw the phone number. So she thought she'd just try it. She didn't have any idea that it was real, but I was really sitting there. So she called immediately. She got me, and that's why I always said if my mom was alive, I couldn't have stayed away so long because she could track me down anywhere.
Wow.
So she was that kind of intuitive stuff. And even though meditation wasn't what people called, my mom always did some kind of contemplation, is what we always called it, where you just slowed down and you thought. She wrote, so it was important for her to stay in her center to write.
Right. Well, writing is a meditation in of itself.
Yeah.
So were you born with the name India, or did you take that name later?
No, I didn't exactly take it, but it's not my birth name either.
Okay.
My friend's just writing a book and this story's in it, but the thing about when my father went to college, he went to school in a school called Alfred University in upstate New York. Mm-hmm. And it's a school, it was for potters and ceramic, engineering and all of interesting things, art. He had started out thinking he'd be a dentist, but he just hated it. But what he liked in the coursework was the molding of teeth. It used to be the one after
molding teeth turned into pottery, eh?
So he went right into pottery. He went to that school. And so in 1946, America was a very segregated country, and 2 Indians were in town. They were from the Punjab, and they were very, very wealthy, very educated people, but they couldn't find a place to live. So my father thought that it would be really fun and shocking. He loved to shock people if they just lived with us. And he met them at school, so he knew they were bright and lovely people. And so we brought them home, and they lived with us, and they lived with us throughout that school year, which was their last and his last too. And they're the ones who, I was about 6 months older. So, and they're the ones who gave me the name India. But then it just became my name through life. It wasn't, but now it's everywhere. I mean, it's a name I have. It's my social security.
Were they calling you India before you went to India?
Oh yeah, I was 6 months old. I've been
okay.
for a long, long time.
All right. So now your mom passes and you go to India for 5 years. Where do you go when you get to India first?
Well, I didn't get to India first. It took a long time, like I said, to get there. I had to go, and I actually think this was in 1966 by then, because my dad was sick and I was already almost 20 when I left. So I had to go to New York, and then in those days you flew on Icelandic Air, and we never knew to stop in Iceland. It wasn't like it is now. Mm. And you would fly into someplace in Germany, and then you would get off the plane and try to get to India. That would be the way to do it if you were going to do it. I had some delays. I got deported from Italy. I had to come back to America and get back on the Icelandic plane and go to...
Why did you get deported from Italy?
It was just one of those weird things. The kids I was hanging out with, they were hippie kids, but their father was the prime minister, and they didn't want their kids to be hippies. So they just picked up all the kids they were with and sent everybody home. And then those kids, it didn't work very well because I met 2 of them on the road to India later on.
You guys met back up again later.
Just by chance. But they didn't have any... It just had to do with the placement of their family in the Italian hierarchy. And the strange thing is, those families ended up at Sai Baba's years later. So I came in contact with the whole families again. So,
well, when I spoke to one of my teachers, Mark Whitwell, he kind of talked about what I think you're talking about. It was like this trail, like this hashish trail to India that you would take or something.
Yeah, there was kind of a hippie trail. You would first end up, like I said, everybody would go Icelandic. It was $69 to fly to Europe.
Oh, man. $69? Wow.
$69.
Oh,
And
man.
then, so you get out of the plane, and you usually would have enough money for a hotel night, So then you're just out there, what we say now is pay your money, take your chances. So we were out there, and then the next stop would be you'd stay sometime in Greece because it was just beautiful and lovely. And then you would get to Turkey, which also was just so historic. You couldn't breathe in Turkey without coming in some contact with, the Ottoman Empire or something much older than us, So it was just an amazing experience. And then everybody got stopped in Turkey because it was the first place you could get hashish and other kinds of drugs. And there was like a big hangout of European kids, all kids born at the end of World War II, actually. That was kind of the age, 44, 46, kind of depending on where they were born at, and born in those years, not those age. So then they would be there, and then you'd go on from Turkey overland, hopefully in a Volkswagen bus of some kind, and then and Turkey was always a culture shock for everybody, and including me, because it was the first. It was wild, The Turks are such interesting people, and they've been the crossroads of history for so long, and so they have. Like I said, it's just steeped in history. You can't breathe in without learning something. It's just impossible. But I was actually very afraid of the Turks if you heard me tell my story back, in the beginning when I came home or when I was in India, I would talk about the Turks, and I would talk about them with some kind of fear because they were very strong people. They kept Europe safe for many years because they were the people, them in Eastern Europe, that were fighting back the hordes of people coming from Iran and Iraq. And so they were, so then you go through Turkey, and there was nothing in Turkey. The road to Iran and Iraq were just, there was nothing there. And you'd sleep in tea shops where they'd have the men and women divided. On one side would be the men's side, and the other side of the curtain would be the women's side. And all they would have down is a beautiful Turkish rug. These rugs were, I don't know if you've seen these kind of rugs, but they used to be rugs that when they made really fine Turkish rugs, which they always have, is these rugs were what they would wrap the rugs in for shipping. The ones that were, and so beautiful. I mean, that was just like amazing that these were the most beautiful things, and they were shipping parcels,
It was anyway, like a popcorn, like in our boxes or something,
Yeah, not anymore. I mean, those rugs are very valuable. If you had one, you'd be considered pretty wealthy. But so then you get through Turkey, and you kind of skimmish through Iraq and get into Iran, and that was very, very primitive because it was desert. It was beautiful, and you took lots of Germans. They had these big tours that would go, and they would go in the Mercedes buses, and they kind of start in Hamburg or something like that, and then go straight across, all the way across. So that would be really amazing. So you'd meet all these travelers, and you'd meet all the Turks, making living off these travelers, and it was an amazing experience. But in Iran, it was even more because there was absolutely nothing there. It was like you get to an oasis, and then if you get to Tehran or Merced, they were beautiful cities. They were absolutely incredible. And it was there was my first place where people would go on these big, giant pilgrimages and end up at, say, Merced, where everybody would come and bathe there, and they would have beautiful Turkish baths. And it was so, in a way, so highly civilized. But just being in that presence of tens of thousands of people coming to pray.
Making pilgrimage.
Yeah. It was just amazing. And then you go from Iran into Afghanistan, and that was even more primitive and jungly. It was just amazing. And then everything took a long time.
Yes, I went to India in 1990, and we just took one flight straight to Delhi. Yeah. We didn't have to go do this whole thing you had to do. And you couldn't do that today. Are you crazy? I mean...
yeah, it's so amazing. So then you would get to India, I ended up staying a long time in Afghanistan because the day I got to Afghanistan was probably I always call it the 10 minutes of peace in Afghanistan. So it was really, I got to stay in Kandahar a long time. I got to stay in Herat a long time. Kabul, I mean, it was just amazing. I met an Afghan family. That was an amazing experience. And I went to their village. And then after some amount of time in Afghanistan, and the Soviets started to come in. In those days, there was a king and the two brothers. One was pro-West and one was pro-East. So in the philosophy of Asia, the surviving brother becomes king. Everybody else somehow gets killed off, So anyway, that was kind of the fight that was going on then, and I had to leave the country. And then I got to Pakistan, and where I stayed for a whole year because I actually got sick in Pakistan. And the family that took me in, my daughter, Winter, who you met, just went back and spent a month with them. We're still really close to that family.
Wow.
I mean,
wow.
They came. We're on the father who was my friend, and he took me in, and then his daughter and her husband came to America. They all came to visit me, and there's a yoga center in Chitral that's up in the northwest of Pakistan that is modeled after the Feathered Pipe Ranch in a Muslim country where all the wealthy Karachi people come and do yoga.
Oh,
so, but it's just amazing that is there, and that family's still there, and we're still close with them. Mm-hmm. So it was amazing. It was very easy to spend time with them. They were a royal family, and also the son-in-law, Jared, who just came to visit us. His uncle was the prime minister, Ayub Khan. So it wasn't like staying rough in any way.
I see. And they took you in, like they just took in a stranger. That's crazy.
Well, that's how it used to be. There were no hotels, and I got sick in Chitral. I got hepatitis, and they had to take me in because it's just so rude to have a foreigner die in your home or your home state. So they took me in, and then months went by, and then eventually a year went by, and then they had that little coup where Ayub Khan was taken over. There was a coup by Yahya Khan, and that's when I had to leave because we were directly related to Ayub Khan, even though they were cousins. My little family was married into that other family. So,
wow, you keep settling into a spot, and then war and upheaval makes you have to leave.
Yeah, well, that's how it's always been. I mean, I would leave places. It was the first time I ever realized in those days how useless a passport was because I couldn't leave on an American passport. I had a choice. That family was all going. They were really in control of PIA Airlines, which they still are, even though it's a government. It's that family branch. And they all got on planes and flew to Switzerland, and I had a choice to either finally go to India or go to Switzerland. And so I picked India. So I was escorted to the border pretty much in Parda and went across and ended up in India on Guru Nanak's birthday. And since you come right into Amritsar, it's on the other side of the border. So my welcoming to India was the big celebration of Guru Nanak's birthday. So
so when you got there was festivities taking place.
All over the place, and they let us stay. They gave us rooms at the Golden Temple. It's we don't have the concept, but in India, every place that has pilgrims has something called a dharamsala, which people like myself or you or family members who come to this place for the pilgrimage have a place to stay. And because it was usually you have to fend for yourself, cook for yourself, and all of that. But because it was Guru Nanak's birthday, the Golden Temple actually cooks and serves everybody food every day anyway, but because it was a pilgrimage, they were cooking in these giant vessels food for tens of thousands of people. So and the thing is that when I got to India, that's where I started out going. I never was going to Pakistan or Afghanistan. Those things just happened. So that's why we always say, and everybody always says, the joy is in the journey, because you may never get to your destination. You don't know that. So.
Well, but you did get to India, and then you spent a bunch of years there too, right?
I did. I spent first year and a half, I spent wandering around trying to become enlightened.
How did that work out?
It didn't work out well.
I know, I tried it too. It just didn't pan out, trying to get enlightened.
Yeah.
It just became all kinds of problematic.
Yeah, it was very problematic because, well, now I have a different concept of enlightenment. But then I thought you just had a nirvana experience. And my dad, when we left each other in Mexico, he gave me the book, which was a book about Vivekananda had written about Ramakrishna, and it was the complete works of Vivekananda about his teacher Ramakrishna. And so I always thought you just forced yourself to become enlightened. You just let your hair mat and your fingernails grew into your palms, and you sat there until you were enlightened. But it didn't work out well for me like it did Sri Ramakrishna. But anyway, it was a great adventure because, no Westerners were trying to do that for sure. So not in that way. There were a few people who actually put in a lot of time. I mean, some of them about, like Bhagwan Das. He was a great pilgrim. He was really trying to find a way through enlightenment. I mean, he did one of those pilgrimages to Bodh Gaya where you do prostrations all the way on your knees, where you're going up and down. And there was this other guy.
I know, but wait a second. Bhagwan Das later on, he's kind of a crazy guy. I mean,
he was crazy.
I mean, there's a documentary that came out about him that was really wild, I mean, it was like a mixed bag.
He was divinely crazy, not to be mixed up with.
Well, here's what I'll say. I still listen to his music, like the music has a lot of power to it, and I enjoy it. So
it really does.
It's I guess sometimes there's that question: can you separate like the man from the teacher or whatever?
Yeah, he did this amazing thing. I was in Varanasi. This was only about 6 years ago, and we were on the river early in the morning, and there's hawkers on the river, people selling things. They're selling videos and tapes.
I was in India, and all the places I went, Varanasi was one of the places I didn't enjoy so much because the touts were so aggressive.
It can be. I mean, it's my favorite place. If anybody ever went with me, they would find a way because I have so many friends there. But so I'm on this little boat in the morning to watch the sunrise on the Ganges with my dear friend who just died recently, but Shyam Lal, he was there. And all of a sudden I hear Bhagwan tapes on the river. All the Indian bhajan singers there are. The one they chose to pay was bootlegged tapes of Bhagwan Das. So immediately that.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.